The movie begins with a man named Mark, who was once a professional arm wrestling champion. He lives in America, but he has been expelled from the American Arm Wrestling League for being involved in a private gambling tournament. Because of that, he's no longer allowed to compete in any professional tournaments. Now, Mark works as a bouncer at a private nightclub. One day, his old friend Roni, who is an agent, comes to meet him. It was actually because of Roni that Mark got expelled from the league for taking part in that gambling match. Mark tells him that he doesn't want to ruin his life again by getting involved in gambling. But Roni explains that he owes a large amount of money and begs Mark to play just one round for his sake. Meanwhile, in another part of the club, arm wrestling matches are taking place. There, a wrestler named Bob is defeating everyone one by one. The club owner is surprised to see Mark there, since Mark actually works for him. No one is willing to bet against Mark. Roni tells the owner that if Mark loses, he'll work in the club for free for the rest of his life, but if he wins, he'll take all the money. The match between Mark and Bob begins. Bob doesn't realize how strong Mark really is. Mark isn't just powerful, he also knows every arm wrestling technique out there. Bob tries his best to defeat him, but Mark's hand doesn't move even an inch. The next moment, Mark easily defeats Bob, but Bob refuses to accept his loss. He stops Roni from taking the money and starts a fight. Mark steps in and beats up Bob and his friends. After that, Roni tells Mark that he's in a hurry, so he leaves after promising to meet him again soon. After getting into a fight with a customer, the club owner slaps Mark and fires him. While leaving, Mark warns the owner that if he ever touches him again, he'll be dead. Now, Mark gets a job as a security officer at a food mall. Then, one day, he gets a call from Roni. Roni tells him that an arm wrestling tournament will be held in Korea, and he wants Mark to take part in it. He also says he'll handle the rest of the business. The wrestler inside Mark won't let him rest, so he grabs his arm wrestling champion medal and leaves for Korea. When he arrives, Roni picks him up at the airport. Mark may have been born in Korea, but he was raised in America. So, he speaks English well but struggles with Korean. Roni takes Mark to a restaurant. There, even Mark's meal is made to match his size, which surprises everyone around them. Then Roni tells Mark about a loan shark named Carlos, who is involved in sports betting. He says they can earn millions by taking advantage of him. Mark doesn't want to get trapped in gambling again, but Roni insists that it's not gambling, it's betting, a kind of business. Later, the two of them go for a walk. People see Mark and treat him like a tourist attraction, taking photos with him. That night, Roni drops Mark off at the hotel and leaves. In the room, Mark finds a mobile phone that Roni has left for him as a gift. The phone already shows his mother's location. Meanwhile, Roni forces a meeting with Carlos to pitch his business proposal. Carlos hangs Roni upside down. Roni quickly gives Carlos Mark's career profile and explains that this time, a big broadcasting company is going to cover an arm wrestling event. Because of that, there's going to be a huge buzz, and they can make a lot of money by betting. He adds that if they have a top wrestler like Mark on their side, they could easily earn millions. Hearing this, Carlos tells Roni that in betting, losing is just as important as winning. Roni replies that if there's profit involved, Mark can be controlled too. Carlos then tells Roni to introduce him to Mark. The next day, Mark follows the location shared on his phone and reaches his mother's house. There, he meets two cute children named Bubbly and Bunty. Bubbly is amazed by how big Mark is, and when she sees him, she calls him a beast. Mark learns from Bubbly that this is their grandmother's house. He assumes that his mother has remarried, so he quietly leaves without saying anything. Back at home, the children's mother, Sujin, listens as Bubbly tells her that she saw a giant man standing outside their house. Bubbly points at Mark through the window to show her who he is. Seeing him, Sujin becomes nervous and tense. That night, Roni sets up a meeting between Mark and Carlos. But from the very first moment, Mark doesn't like Carlos at all. To test Mark's strength, Carlos arranges a match between him and a local arm wrestler. Mark easily defeats the guy. Then, one by one, other arm wrestlers challenge Mark, but he beats every single one of them. Actually, the whole thing is a demonstration for a billionaire investor named Gene, who also happens to be Carlos's financier. After watching Mark's incredible performance, Gene is ready to invest money in him. Meanwhile, we learn that Sujin runs a small boutique that's barely staying afloat. She works there all night, goes home in the morning, and sleeps during the day. Even though she owes money to Carlos, she still lives her life with energy and determination. Now that Mark has found a sponsor, both of them stay in a 5-star hotel and enjoy the luxury there. Then Roni gets a message from Carlos saying that Mark has to win the first round of tomorrow's private match and lose in the second round. But Roni doesn't know how to convince Mark to lose. The next morning, when Sujin comes home from work, Bunty asks her if she brought shoes for him. But Sujin puts it off, using work as an excuse. After that, both children go to school. Once they leave, she opens a box that contains a photo of young Mark with his mother. At the same time, Mark returns to the house again to ask about his mother. On the way, he meets Bunty and Bubbly. Mark asks them if their grandmother's name is Jenny, and they say yes. He then learns from the children that their mother is home now. But Bundy warns Mark that if he comes back, he'll call the police. Then we see Carlos, who calls Danny to invite him to tonight's match. Danny is a national-level arm wrestling champion. Carlos wants Danny to accompany Mark, watch him during the match, and give his expert opinion on whether Mark is really worth investing crores of rupees in. Meanwhile, Mark follows Sujin to her boutique, which is located just below the wrestling club. Roni sees him watching her, and Sujin also becomes tense when she notices Mark there. Roni takes Mark to a restaurant and nervously tells him that he has to win the first round and lose the second one, because this is business. The surprising part is, Mark actually agrees, which leaves Roni shocked. That night, the match begins. A 7-foot-tall giant steps in front of Mark. Seeing this, Roni gets nervous. They shake hands, and the match begins. At first, the man seems to overpower Mark, but soon, Mark defeats him. Danny, who is watching Mark's match from a distance, immediately recognizes from Mark's arm wrestling that he's a pro-level wrestler because he's using the techniques so skillfully. He learns from Carlos that 10 years ago, Mark was one of the world's top 10 wrestlers. Now Carlos tells everyone that if they want, they can bet their money on Mark, because Mark is supposed to lose this round. Just then, Sujin arrives to watch Mark's match, and Carlos starts harassing her. Mark notices both of them. The second round begins with the same giant man, but this time too, Mark defeats him easily. Because of this, Roni becomes tense and Carlos gets angry since he has suffered a big loss. To make up for the loss, Roni tries to provoke Danny into having an arm wrestling match with Mark, but Danny clearly refuses, saying that he doesn't take part in betting matches. Mark also refuses, which makes Carlos furious. Mark pushes him away and walks off. Roni then realizes that Mark only won to show off in front of Sujin. Now he wants to know who Sujin really is, but Mark doesn't answer him. Roni then goes to Sujin's shop and asks her about Mark, but she avoids the question. Just then, Carlos shows up with his men and starts beating up Roni. A moment later, Mark arrives and starts fighting Carlos's men. When Carlos tries to kill Sujin, Mark steps in and attacks him. But before things get worse, the police arrive and arrest both Mark and Roni for causing trouble. They take them to the police station. At the station, Roni tells the officers that Mark is an American arm wrestler. To prove it, he asks the inspector to wrestle with Mark. Mark easily defeats the inspector. Seeing his own hand's condition, the inspector admits that Mark is a professional, but he refuses to let him go without an ID. Then Sujin shows up and presents Mark's passport to the inspector. Bubbly hugs Mark, calling him uncle. Sujin tells the inspector that Mark is her mother's son, which means he's her older brother. Mark is shocked to hear this. Sujin shows the inspector some childhood photos of Mark with their mother. Then we learn that when Mark was a child, his mother gave him up for adoption because she didn't have enough money to raise him. Later, an American couple adopted him and took him to the United States. Roni realizes that Sujin is Mark's stepsister. Mark finds out from Bubbly that his mother passed away from cancer last year. We also learn that Sujin's husband died in an accident. Sujin tells the inspector that Mark came to Korea to help her and wasn't involved in any trouble. He was actually protecting her from some thugs. Hearing this, the inspector lets him go. Roni wants Mark to go to Sujin's house, but Mark doesn't want to go. So Bubbly innocently asks her uncle to come home. Mark and Roni spent the night at Sujin's house. By the second day, Bubbly had already become close to her uncle. One morning, Bunty wanted to go to the bathroom, but the door wouldn't open. Mark tried to open it but ended up breaking the door open. Meanwhile, some kids were smoking outside Sujin's house. When Sujin stopped them, they started behaving rudely toward her. But as soon as they saw Mark with her, they got scared, apologized, and quickly left. Later, Sujin told Mark that he could stay in her house for as long as he wanted. After some time, the kids found Mark's championship medal inside his bag and decided to keep it for themselves. A little later, when Mark was leaving the house with his bag, he saw Carlos's goons coming toward Sujin's place to collect the money she owed them. Mark threatened them and sent them away. The kids were happy to see him stand up for Sujin. Mark then realized that if he left, Sujin and the kids would face a lot of problems. So he goes back home and cooks some American-style food for the kids, but they don't like it at all. So instead, he takes them to a buffet restaurant, where he unexpectedly wins a prize. The kids are thrilled and start to really like their uncle. Meanwhile, Roni is feeling tense about how to make money. Suddenly, he gets an idea. What if someone made a documentary about Mark and broadcast it on TV? That way, he could earn some money and maybe even get sponsors for Mark. So he calls up his friend who works at the channel. At the same time, Mark begins his workout. On the other hand, Carlos starts searching for someone who can replace Mark. He finds out that Danny once had a teammate who was undefeated in arm wrestling and was also known as Korea's #1 arm wrestler, a guy named Punch. But Punch was sent to jail for using steroids and assaulting people. Now, Carlos plans to make Punch face off against Mark, but Punch is a ruthless fighter. He doesn't just defeat his opponents, he destroys them, often causing serious injuries to their hands. That's his signature style. On the other hand, Roni thinks about putting Mark into professional tournaments. But before that, he needs to take part in a small competition in Busan. So, everyone heads to Busan in Sujin's car. During the trip, Sujin tells Mark that her husband died in an accident, and since then, she's been afraid of driving. Mark helps her feel more confident, and because of that, they start getting to know each other better. Meanwhile, Danny is the one running the competition in Busan. He keeps defeating one opponent after another. Then, Mark steps up and challenges him. Danny, a national champion who completely relies on his technique, accepts the challenge. Both of them face off in an intense match. Danny uses all his strength and skill to try to beat Mark, but after a tough fight, Mark ends up defeating him. When the undefeated national champion finally loses, the broadcasters cover the story. As the winner, Mark and his family celebrate with a treat. The kids are thrilled and proud of him. Meanwhile, under Mark's guidance, Bubbly also wins a wrestling match against a boy. Everyone enjoys the trip together. At night, Sujin asks Mark if he wants to go to his mother's memorial, but Mark is still angry that his mother left him when he was a child. Joking around, Sujin starts wrestling with Mark, and Mark enjoys letting her win. Meanwhile, a documentary about Mark is made, which Sujin and the kids watch. Even Punch sees it in jail. One day, as usual, Bunty asks Sujin about his shoes, and she avoids the question just like every other day. But in reality, she has already bought the shoes and wants to surprise him. Later, Mark goes to Bunty's school, gives him the shoes, and tells him that his mother really cares about him. A boy standing nearby calls Mark a gorilla. Mark then tells the boy's mother in English that he isn't a gorilla, but a professional arm wrestler. The woman suddenly remembers seeing him on TV, and now she looks at him with respect. Finally, Bubbly asks her Uncle Mark to promise that he'll always stay a champion, and Mark gives her his word. At night, Roni goes to meet his dad, who works as a parking attendant. Roni doesn't like seeing his dad working like that. Because of debt, his dad lost everything after taking a loan to help a friend who later ran away. Roni introduces Mark to his dad. Mark then realizes that Roni does all this just to pay off his dad's debt. Roni also feels hurt whenever his dad gets insulted at the parking lot. Meanwhile, Mark breaks the bus handle while boarding, just to make a little child laugh. Small moments like these add a light, funny touch to the movie. Later, Sujin plans a short trip. Actually, she wants to take Mark to visit his mother's memorial. That night, Mark finds out that his mother used to send him emails that he never received. After all, how could the poor woman have known his email address? Now Mark reads his mother's emails, which are more like diary entries. Through them, he discovers that Sujin isn't really his sister. She was an orphan woman raising 2 children on her own after her husband passed away. Feeling sorry for her, Mark's mother brought her home and loved her like her own daughter. In return, she finally got the family she had always longed for. Sujin also saw her as a mother and took care of her until she died. On the other hand, even after working so hard, when Mark still doesn't get any support, Roni goes back to Carlos. Carlos tells him he's found a new wrestler. A wrestler named Punch introduces himself by beating up Roni. The next day, while going on a trip, Mark looks upset because he's just found out that Sujin isn't actually related to him. At the memorial, the kids tell their grandmother that they really liked their uncle. Then Mark asks Sujin why she lied to him about being his sister. He tells her that she didn't just lie to him, but also to the kids. In fact, Sujin had brought Mark there only to tell him the truth, and she apologized to him. But Mark can't accept this family built on lies. He feels deeply depressed and tells Roni that he's also a fake friend, that he only used him for money. Mark always saw him as a brother, but Roni saw him as a money-making machine. Now Mark leaves the house and walks away. After he left, Bubbly missed him, and Sujin missed him too. Now, Mark starts preparing for the tournament, while Roni begins studying every participant taking part in it. He writes down all their strategies and makes a game plan for Mark. Mark, on the other hand, starts doing intense workouts to regain his strength, while Punch secretly injects steroids into his body. Finally, the day of the tournament arrives. The children are excited and want to watch their Uncle Mark's match, but Sujin doesn't want to go. She worries that seeing them there might make Mark feel even worse. She tells Bubbly that Mark isn't really part of their family. Hearing this, Bubbly innocently asks, if only family can live together, then why did we live with Grandma? Sujin has no answer to that. Meanwhile, Mark reaches the stadium. Roni gives him the book where he's written all the strategies of the participants. Mark lets go of his anger and forgives Roni. Danny also comes over and greets Mark. Just then, Carlos tells them that both Mark and Danny are going to lose badly to Punch. The tournament finally begins. Mark, Danny, and Punch are placed in separate groups so they can meet each other in the finals. During an interview, the anchor asks Mark about his sister and mother, but he can't answer. Meanwhile, the children can't resist their excitement and sneak out to the stadium to watch Mark's match. As the matches start, all 3 of them begin defeating their opponents one by one. Punch fights brutally, even crushing his opponent's hand, while Mark easily wins all his matches. Seeing Mark's winning streak, Gene starts to worry because his friends have bet their money on Punch. Soon, Carlos calls Ronnie and offers him $200,000 to make sure Mark loses the match against Danny. According to Carlos, Punch can easily defeat Danny in the finals and become the champion. Ronnie accepts the money, but Mark refuses to take part in any cheating. He tells Ronnie to return the money, reminding him that this is his last chance to re-enter the international tournament. After all, Mark had promised the children that he would become the champion. When Soo-jin finds out that the kids have gone to watch Mark's match, she also goes to the stadium. Seeing the kids in the crowd gives Mark more courage, and after a tough fight, he manages to defeat Danny. This loss makes Gene deeply upset. Later, Carlos beats Ronnie badly, but Mark rushes in and saves him. Finally, it's time for the championship match, Mark vs. Punch. Soo-jin arrives just in time to watch. As the match begins, Punch cheats and twists Mark's thumb, causing him a lot of pain. Then, both their hands are strapped together, and the fight continues. Taking advantage of Mark's injury, Punch completely overpowers him. Mark is on the verge of losing when he suddenly spots Soo-jin in the crowd. In that moment, he realizes that the people who love him believe in him and have high hopes for him. With that thought, Mark gathers all his strength and fights back with full determination. Everyone holds their breath as the intense fight continues. Finally, Mark gives it everything he's got, and defeats Punch. Mark becomes the champion, and everyone is overjoyed. In his speech, Mark apologizes to his mother for not being able to meet her in her final moments. He says that because of her, he found a sister and a new family. He then thanks his mother from the bottom of his heart. This victory opens the doors of the American League for Mark. Soon, he travels to America to take part in the tournament. The children wish him good luck to win the championship trophy. Mark enters the stadium filled with enthusiasm and confidence. And that's where the story ends. If you had fun watching, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.